Well, howdy, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to economics class. Today we're going to start a unit. I guess you should have already done the reading, so this should be review for you. But you never know. Everyone's kind of working on their own pace right now. I know, but we're going to kind of start a unit on the ways that businesses are organized, a couple different methods of what they call business organization. So a business organization just basically means any enterprise that exists for the purpose of making a profit. And we're going to look at like the methods by which they're organized, which the primary ones we're going to look at are sole proprietorships, partnerships, LLCs, and corporations. So today we'll start by talking about sole proprietorships, which are basically self-owned businesses, and they make up a lot of the small businesses in America. And of course, I kind of have a heavy heart kind of even talking about that today because I understand that this is a very difficult day for a lot of small businesses. Just with people can't leave their house, so people can't buy stuff from them a lot, So, please, in addition, obviously, I hope everyone's been, praying for people who have the virus and praying for it to go away and praying for the people that are in the hospital, but also be praying for businesses because, a lot of people have worked really hard and built dreams that they don't have enough to stay in business and they're having to close down and stuff like that. So please, keep our business owners in prayer. So with a little bit of a heavy heart about that stuff, we now kind of talk about how those small businesses are organized, and today we'll focus in on what they call the sole proprietorship. So sole proprietorship, say that 7 times fast. Actually, say it 1 time fast is accidentally the bar that I can't clear. So a sole proprietorship, look at that. Is a business that is owned by one person. It's owned by an individual. So if you decided that you were going to start a lawn care business and you were going to go out and go around and knock on people's doors and say, hey, I'll cut your grass, blah, 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 and you started a lawn, that would probably be a sole proprietorship, right? You would be doing that all by yourself. You wouldn't have a corporate board with investors and, partners. Honestly, you would just kind of go out and do that, right? So sole proprietorships make up 70% of American businesses, according to your textbook. But only about 5% of the actual economic product of America. So they typically trade in small scale. This is not Amazon. This is not Walmart. This is, Taqueria Guanajuato. This is the barbershop. This is speaking of barbershop, I'm going to need one bad because it's been a little while since I felt like having a stranger, getting close spitting distance of my face to cut my hair, and this beard is already getting out of control. It's going to be bad by the time they lift this quarantine. I don't even know. Those of you who've been wanting me to go full ZZ Top, this might be the closest I get. I should have been, I guess it would break my lifetime goal of no selfies, but I should have just been taking pictures along the way of stages of the beard to see how bad it gets over the weeks that we're locked down. So we'll see how it gets. But because it won't even be legal to get your hair cut for another 2 weeks here. But anyway, so the barber shop, the hardware store, all of the little businesses that kind of dot. That dot the landscape, laundromats, you can go on and on. Most of these types of businesses, or many of them, are just owned by one person. And there's some pros and cons that go along with that. And so we're going to look with this and with all the other types of business organization, we're going to look at kind of the advantages and disadvantages that are present with that. So your book gives a case study of a hypothetical guy that wants to start a business. In this case, they have a guy who wants to start a comic book store. And so they talk about the stages he would have to go to make that happen. So they said, first off, so the fellow needs money to rent and renovate the space. So if you're going to start a business, the first thing you got to do is where do you put it, right? So, and I do hope that many of you would go on to be business owners. I think one thing that kind of disappoints me, every time I've taught economics in my, and sometimes even I'll do this with history classes. Sometimes I'll just ask, how many of you want to own a business when you grow up? And I'm surprised often how few people kind of aspire to that. But there's a certain nobility about sort of owning your own thing that I think is valuable. I say that I don't own a business, but at least I understand why someone else would. I think America is a better place if more people own businesses. I don't think it's the ultimate. I don't think that people were designed to just be employees living off of other people's business ideas. I think it's good to start your own thing. If you can, or if that's the where the Lord's leading you in your particular, stage and vocation in life. But so the first thing you need to do is, you got to find a space to put it, which can be, some difficulty. Real estate isn't cheap, whether it's rental or purchasing. So in this case, he had to renovate some space. They said, he gets started by taking a hefty withdrawal from his savings account. Well, first off, that means he has to have had hefty savings to withdraw from, right? So one thing about if you have dreams of starting a business, you cannot just work a 9 to 5 and live paycheck to paycheck. You've got to live tight enough and well budgeted enough that you can actually save up significant amounts of money, or else get loans. And so most people, when they start a business, very few people, especially starting their first business, are able to do it out of pocket. It normally involves loans, which is a difficult thing because the borrower is servant to the lender, and so if business isn't good, the bank is always there threatening to threatening to take your stuff back. So that's one of the pitfalls, and there's a reason why so many small businesses fail in the first couple of years. A lot of times, even the small businesses typically that are become economically successful, and you can do very well for yourself as a small businessman, but typically there's challenges in the first few years because almost everyone starts off in debt. Unless you happen to have generous and rich family, or you have. Or you've worked very hard at a good, well-paying job and not blown that extra money on, eating lobster tails and caviar. You've got to get a good job and then live like you have a mediocre one for a while before you can start. If you're not going to take out a loan. So, so in this case, he says he tries to get a loan from the bank, and no good. I mean, if you try to go get a loan from the bank, you've got to be able to convince them that it's a sound investment. You've got to have a certain amount of collateral and a certain amount of credit, and all these sorts of things. And so in this case, he was not able to get a loan from the bank originally, but he was able to borrow $15,000 to get started from friends and family. Of course, not everyone's in position to do that. So, some people may be. But so then once he gets the money, whether that comes from the bank, whether it comes from family, whether it comes from savings, if it comes from robbing a bank and getting away with it, which, not encouraging. I doubt that would work anyway. Ultimately, after doing all that, the next thing he has to do is kind of start preparing to open, which means starting to navigate the web of business licenses and stuff like that. It's not always easy to just jump in and get a business license. You got to pay for it. You got to go through certain things with the code. If it's a restaurant, there's certain health things you got to do. I remember talking to some a family I used to go to church with that was trying to start a deli, and the way the code was written was literally impossible for them to meet the code because one regulation said that the sink had to be this close to the toilet, another one said it had to be this far away from the toilet, and it was literally impossible to do both things in the space that they had. So so this can be quite the web to navigate. America has not done a decent job of keeping our regulatory regime small in recent years, and I should be careful because I'm really tempted to go on a rant right now because I read a story the other day about how many potential things that people could have done to help the coronavirus thing that were stopped by government red tape, and I'm so ticked off about it. I could go punch someone in the face. Go read. There's a story that John Stossel, the libertarian leaning reporter did on ways that we could have addressed the coronavirus earlier through the free market, if not for government red tape, and particularly as it relates to the Center for Disease Control and the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, just doing absolutely insane and stupid regulatory things. I just saw a thing the other day about a nurse who got fired or had to quit because she was not being allowed to wear a mask that she brought from home to protect her face while she was assigned to the coronavirus wing. And the only reason that could possibly make sense for the hospital is if there's some weird regulation that they're liable for something if someone wears a homemade protective mask. Like at some point, can we get away from all the litigiousness and just have some common sense? And America has no idea how to do that. Like, let's fire a nurse in the middle of the worst outbreak of disease in a century because she wants to wear a mask that didn't deplete the hospital reserves. Insanity. Just, oh God. Anyway, all right, I should stop. It's one thing when I'm filling your time at home, at school, and you want me to go on a rant. I shouldn't rant this much when I'm making you watch YouTube videos at your house when you can be out chilling. But anyway, so obviously you've got the web of regulations you got to figure out. You've got all these professional licenses you've got to do. My other political hobby horse that's frequent is, I think, one of the most underrated political issues, because it's more of a state and local thing than a federal thing. But the amount of businesses that you have to get a license for that you really don't need a license for, that it's just the government trying to take money and entrench the people that already have the licenses from new competition. I understand needing to pass a restaurant needing to pass a health code. I think that's a fairly commonsensical regulation, but the idea that a barber or a florist or some of these people have to have passed a state exam to be able to have a license, it's insanity. And it prevents a lot of people from getting businesses started because all this stuff costs money. So you've got to get through regulations. You've got to start actually got to file papers making your business a legal entity. You got to get a site permit for, a building permit for certain renovations. Certainly if you build your own, you got to get a building permit, but you may have to get permission for certain renovations as well. You got to register your company as a company so that the government can tax it and so on. And then the next stage in this case study, the guy starts to have difficulties at first. And most small businesses do have a difficult first little bit getting off the ground. So he was worried that the store would fail and he'd be stuck with no income and no way to repay the loans. So he kind of thought at first that the best thing he could do is kind of hold on to the cash that he has. And finally, in the story, he decides that the best thing he can do is actually go ahead and spend $1,000 of that on advertising. And that winds up being a good investment because it increases his profit. And that's the sort of decision making you have to do. Am I going to sink a little bit into this kind of flurry of advertising and things like that to increase visibility? Or do I need to hold on to what I've got because I don't have that much on reserve? And a lot of business owners are stuck making tough decisions like that all the time, especially at the startup phase. So in this case, after 18 months, he paid back his loans and was earning a profit because, evidently the advertising brought people in. Some promotions and sales he came up with brought people in. He decided to expand his inventory, hired an assistant. And then this time he decides he wants to go back to the bank for help in some of this expansion. And this time the bank is going to be more open to him. One of the strange ironies of the way the financial system works, and it's just the way the world, I wish it wasn't like this, but it just is. One of the strange ironies is you kind of have to have a little money to get money loaned. So the more you need a loan, the harder it is to get one. And from the bank's perspective, that makes sense. Would you rather lend money to a rich guy or to a poor guy? Well, the answer should be kind of obvious if your only interest is getting paid back. But of course, this is a weird spot because you're sitting here as a middle class person. You're someone that doesn't have a lot of money, just sitting around and say, I know I could make this business happen if someone would give me 10 grand. No one wants to give me 10 grand because I don't have the money to make that business happen. So it's this weird vicious cycle. But in this case, because he's had a little bit of success with what he's done, The bank is now more willing to give him a loan, so he's able to borrow some money to expand. And so that becomes a good business decision in this particular story. Now, of course, this story ended with a relatively happy ending. Compared to, I don't know how many independent comic book stores really come up with with a happy ending. But this guy did in the story, so we'll roll through textbook. So, what are the pros and cons of doing a sole proprietorship where you, are the sole owner of the company? There's a couple things. We'll look at the advantages and then the disadvantages. But the two most important things you need to know about sole proprietorships are that they have limited life and they have unlimited liability. So what that means, limited life means with a sole proprietorship, there's only one owner. So if the owner dies or the owner retires, the business goes with him. He may pass it on. Hypothetically, he may create a way for someone to inherit the business. He may sell the business if he wants to retire. So it's not like it's illegal to do that. But hypothetically, let's say he has no heirs. He's a single man who has no will, no children, no wife to have, to naturally inherit the business, and he gets killed by a car wreck the next day. Well, the business just stops existing. It's not there anymore because he was the business. So limited liability, so limited life and unlimited liability. So what unlimited liability means, if you've got a situation where there's limited liability, like a corporation or a partner, we'll talk about a couple of limited liability companies in the next few days. Then what that means is there's a limit to how much the owner is responsible for the debts of the business. If you own stock in Microsoft, and Microsoft is in debt, and Microsoft can't pay the debt, they're not going to take your personal stuff because you own Microsoft stock. That's a corporation. But a sole proprietorship where you own the business, where it's, if I were to start up a business of Mr. Fulcher's online history tutoring, and I registered it in my name. I'm the sole proprietor. I'm the only one who owns it. I'm the only one who's responsible for it. And in the course of doing this, I had to borrow, I had to borrow a few $1,000s to get a good camera so that the picture would be less crappy than it is right now, or whatever. Guess what? If the business owes that money, I owe that money. And if the business folds, if I decide to shut down the shop and say I'm out of here, well, if I'm the sole proprietor, I've still got to pay my business creditors back personally. So I'm responsible for the debt. So those are the two main driving factors. So we'll look. So the advantages of sole proprietorship. The first thing is they're easy to open and close. Your startup requirements are a business license, site permit, a legally registered name. If you decided to get out of the business, it'd be pretty easy to do that as well. It's pretty easy to legally dissolve it once your bills are settled. If you've paid up your debts, you can just apply, just have the business shut down and close up shop, and you'll be fine. So you can get in and out of the market relatively easy. It's easier to get out than to get in. Because get in involves startup cost and all that. There's not as many regulations on sole proprietorships. Like corporations and some of these types of businesses have extensive regulations. The Wall Street, the list of financial regulations in the corporate code. I mean, it's massive. But sole proprietorship, you don't have anywhere near as tight a regulation. There's a handful of things you got to do. I mean, you still got to pay your taxes in a legal way. If you have employees, you can't legally pay them under the table, and so you got to report the tax. So there's a few things like that. Obviously, you got to set up your shop in an area that's zoned for business. I mean, so you've still got some regulations. You got to honor labor laws if you have employees, but there's not like just volumes and volumes of special regulations that apply to you. The thing that really people love about sole proprietorships is being their own boss. There's a certain level of freedom. They can make their own decisions. They decide how the business runs. They don't have to deal with a boss that they disagree with, making decisions they disagree with. They don't have to answer to anybody else. If they see an opportunity, they can go after it without having to convince a board. If they decide something isn't working or something just isn't worth it, they can just stop doing it without having to convince a board. You know, hypothetically, in a very hypothetical sense, you can take your vacation when you want to, you can work when you want to. Now, the reality is, the lived experience of people trying to get their own business off the ground is you actually wind up probably working harder than employees, right? If you just took a job with some corporate middle manager, you work 9 to 5, you're probably going to work a lot less than someone who owns their own business, even if it's successful, because there's so many things that you need to look into, you may be, the problem with being a sole proprietorship that, let's say you want to own a barbershop. Well, you can be really good at cutting hair and really bad at running a business, right? Or you can be really good at doing tree removal and really bad at managing the books. So, the sole proprietorship, you have to be good at the product and also good at the business management side of things. And that's where some people get tripped up because, sometimes the type of person that is a master electrician is not always the type of person that is great at, drumming up business and advertising or what have you. So, but at least hypothetically, the reality is, you wind up, oftentimes starting a business, you wind up working like a dog, especially for the first couple years. But on the other hand, you do at least hypothetically just kind of have freedom to do what to choose your means of operation. And there's a sense of pride in the fact that this business is your baby. You birthed it, you created it. If it's successful, it's because you worked hard and made it happen. You had a dream and you saw it realized. And so there's a lot of kind of a personal, kind of romantic attachment with the freedom that comes from not being employed. And there's a level of security that, obviously every business, whether it's corporate, whether it's nonprofit, whether it's LLC, whether it's partnership, they all can go belly up, if the market turns in a bad way for their industry. But one thing about it is when you own your own business, you have no chance of getting fired, right? If you have a factory job and they decide, the cars aren't selling this year like they were last year, we need to lay off 10% of the workforce. Sorry, so as long as you're an employee relying on someone else to feed you, there's always the chance that you lose your job. And that's just the reality of life. When you're a business owner, you still have to work hard to keep the business in business. But once the business is in business, you're taken care of, right? So that is one thing about owning your own thing. You're less dependent on somebody else. And one thing I think, just the way the kind of culture war is going right now, I kind of think it's very important as believers that a lot of believers be independent business owners, because increasingly a lot of these big kind of corporations and these kind of business behemoths have kind of like sided with coming against people that would kind of dissent against secular orthodoxy in different ways. There was a guy who was the CEO of Mozilla, which is the company that invented the Firefox web browser, who, he was the CEO of the company, very successful, a millionaire, I think, but he lost his job because they found out that he had donated. This is back when, back when gay marriage was a really big political issue, before the Supreme Court, ended democracy and just instilled it by fiat in a terribly unconstitutional decision. But it turned out that he had donated to a pro-traditional marriage cause and literally got fired. There's a guy who works for Google who got fired from Google because he distributed a memo. They were talking about different ways that they wanted, about how badly they wanted Google to be more inclusive of women. He actually wrote a article giving some reasons why and suggesting these are some of the problems why this is a more male-dominated field or whatever, and explaining his reasons. And it was I've read pieces of it. It's by no means sexist. But I don't know, a few angry feminists got mad about it, like, oh, how dare you say that women think any differently at all, and the dude lost his job. And so I think if everyone is dependent on big corporations for employment, then the reality is you're gonna be dependent on the corporation, and when they start saying anyone who works here has to think like this, you got to play along if you want to keep your job. And so I think that's an untenable position for the majority of Christians to be in the long term if that culture doesn't start to shift in the corporation. So I think it's very important to have people that own their own business. I think that's a really big, important thing for the kingdom. So, and the other thing is the owner keeps the profit. So, if it's a corporation, and you make $1 million in profit, and you've got people that own 1 million shares, well, congratulations. That's, $1 dividend a share that comes out. But if you own your own tree removal service and you make, $600 profit on a job, then, you've got $600 in your pocket, unless, you may have, now again, profit means you've already paid out your payroll and all that kind of stuff, so you might not have made that much. But any profit that comes in as the owner of the business, you are able to put it in your personal bank account. And you even, a lot of small businesses that are sole proprietorships even get to kind of file their taxes as an individual and be taxed at kind of individual rates that are different than some other things. So, what's the downside to being a sole proprietorship? Why do more people go into partnerships and working in corporations and so on? So the disadvantages of sole proprietorships, the first off is the issue of where you come up with the money. Because again, most people, unless they've already run a successful business and started a new business, with the money from the last one, most people just don't have the cash on hand to get started without taking out a loan. And getting a loan is not always easy. Even just getting the loan to buy this here house, this particular little mansion that you see here, just unbelievable the hoops you had to jump through. It's just it's a frustrating process for that. And I can't imagine when you're trying to get a business loan and you've got to show your business plans and all that stuff, because you probably got to get a loan to either buy or rent, the land, plus for the business itself, all the capital. If you're trying to start something that's going to require machines, I think we did a hypothetical about a blue jean factory in one of these chapters, right? If you went back to that case and assumed that woman's blue jean business was a sole proprietorship, well, she's got to buy industrial strength sewing machines, right, to make the jeans. Well, you almost saw me choking to death live on the internet. I wonder if I'd have turned blue and died if Google would have banned it, but went down the wrong way. Oh, my God. Well, I hope that made your day. How'd your homeschooling go? Well, I watched my teacher die live on the internet. It was great. So anyway, limited funds. You got to find some way to come up with the money, and a lot of times, even once you start to make a profit, it's not really profit because it's got to go right back into paying the loan off. And it's even successful small businesses, it's usually several years before they're in the clear on their startup loans. The second drawback is the limited life angle. So some of the advantages of it are also disadvantages. So the good thing is you can get in and out of the market easily. The bad side is, you can build a business and it die with you if you've not made arrangements for it to be inherited, or and there's paperwork that goes along with that may or may not complicate that or make it hard to do. And then But the biggest drawback, the biggest drawback is what they call unlimited liability, because that means that, they use this example. This guy who started a bookstore here. Well, if congratulations, you've got your store, you've made your dream a reality. But if 18 months in nobody's coming and buying the comics, then and you can't figure out how to keep the store afloat, and the whole thing goes down. Well, let's say that Bart's Comics here, ends its life in the business cycle, 10 grand in debt. Guess who owes 10 grand when all is said and done? Bart. And so what that means is, you go out, you start a business, you've got a certain degree of debt. If there are unpaid debts when the business folds, they can come after your house, they can come after your car, they can come after any other kind of other expensive possessions that you've bought, because they can say, if they can sue you for non-payment, and then take any wages you get from the next place. So, if you're a sole proprietor and your business fails, you're putting your home in jeopardy potentially. You're putting your car in jeopardy potentially. And then you're really up the creek without a paddle. So the risk of if you fail spectacularly as a sole proprietor, it can rebound to really impact your personal economic situation, not just in the short term of losing your job, which is a danger for everyone, but forever. I mean, everyone, you'll never be in a position where that's not at some level of danger. But that's why it's important to be able to trust the Lord with your provision, because if you're too dependent on one thing, you never know where it goes. But if you're in another kind of business, you can lose your job. But if you're in a sole proprietorship, you can lose your job, and with it, everything that you have that's already been paid off. So that's really the danger of a sole proprietorship. But with that, you get to be your own boss. You get to set your own hours. Of course, a lot of times they're long hours in real life, especially in the first few years. But you get to kind of close up shop if you want to, get in and out easy. So there's good things about it. There's also some real drawbacks, which is what causes a lot of people to aim instead for partnerships, which is what we'll talk about in the next video.